The Giants have been the epitome of mediocre the last couple of seasons, finishing exactly 500 2 years ago, just a couple games below 500 last year. And surprise, surprise, PECOTA projections are out, and guess what? Giants are projected at 81-81. But hey, I'm going to tell you why at this point in the offseason, that's not necessarily a horrible thing.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. I've also been doing Locked On Giants for almost 5 years. We're coming up on that anniversary. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Check us out there if you have not already. And please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And where we get started is with the PECOTA projections. Now, this is not, just a full disclosure, I am not like Team PECOTA necessarily. I don't think they do the best projections, but they're just one of a number of projection systems that primarily kind of focuses on team record as opposed to a lot of the projections I talk about on this show. I'm talking about individual player projections. And in fact, later on, we're going to get into Jung Ho Lee a little bit more, the most significant addition the Giants have made this offseason, $113 million plus a $19 million plus 19 point something million dollar posting fee. And so a significant addition. And we're going to look at, we've already looked at projections for him in the past, but there are even more that have come out since. And so we'll talk about how there's a really interesting trend there. But the PECOTA projections, I just noticed this because I was reading Grant Brisbee in The Athletic, and and in the article we found what the PECOTA projections were for the San Francisco Giants. And what they were, it doesn't shock me, is 81.0 wins. 81.0, right on the nose. Like a 500 team, 1,000 simulations. The Giants are the averagest team that ever averaged. So I'm just kind of skimming through what Grant Brisbee wrote here. And he mentions correctly that the Braves and Dodgers are projected to win 100 games or more, but that everybody else, this is a tremendous point that he makes here, is that, and honestly, this is the point I have made too, which is that we overly focus on the division and how hard it is to win the division and keeping up with the Dodgers. Yes, it stinks that if you just concede the division right away, but if you're being realistic, I mean, the Dodgers are just on another planet, and it's not just then the Giants, it's then almost everybody else, maybe outside of the Braves in the National League. And these projections say that, but of course, weird, crazy things happen. We've seen it 2021. But you've got 100 plus win projections for the Braves and Dodgers. And then beyond that, the next best team by these projections is 85.5 wins. And so if you're the Giants and you're coming up with a win projection of 81, you're right there in the thick of it. And unfortunately, what it means is that you never would get to, if you don't win the division, there's no chance of skipping that first round, which is definitely a benefit because you have 0% chance of being eliminated in that first round. Whereas if you have to play it, you have a chance of being eliminated in that first round. But I think if you had a choice of skipping the first round altogether or winning the first round, it seems like it's almost better to win that first round because the other teams do seem to get a little bit rusty, and you're coming off a thrilling win and, champagne celebration. And so you're riding high and the other team's just kind of sitting back getting rusty. And so I digress. I mean, the projections, 85.5 wins for the Cardinals. Interestingly, the Cardinals got a horrible season, projecting as the third best team in the National League. This is kind of where I get a little bit like, PECOTA, not my favorite, and I don't know that I trust this, but hey, the Cardinals' collapse last year was unexpected. And then the D-backs, 85.2, Phillies, 84.3, Mets, 83.6, and then there's the Giants at 81. And so that would have them as the team like right on the edge that misses out on the postseason. I feel like they've been just consistently kind of in that spot projections-wise. But, okay, with all of that said, the good news about, let me just finish. There's a couple teams at 80 point something. The Marlins and the Cubs, 80.3, 80.2. And then the Padres, how about this? Last year they were projected to win like 100-plus games, and now they're at 79.7. It's just kind of crazy what one bad year and then trading away some players and losing some players in free agency. That's the thing. We get overly worked up about a team like the Padres, and then they fall flat on their face, and then look at where they are now projection-wise. So anyway, there's a lot of teams kind of squished together. Like we're talking 9 teams between 78 and 85 and a half wins, and that's pretty close. And the margin of error in baseball, the what is it called? I forget what it's called, but like the normal expected kind of error is you're not going to likely land exactly on your projection. The plus or minus is pretty wide in terms of expected outcomes. So what I'm saying is the good news is for the Giants is that there are still ways to significantly improve the team, and I think that they will. You may be skeptical about that. I'm just going to go on record, as I have over and over and over. Just because it's February 6th doesn't mean that you can't make major additions, because there just so happen to be 4 major free agents sitting out there on the free agent market. And it's easy to look at the Giants and be like, why aren't they just going out and signing these guys? I've seen people say, I've gotten tweets at me saying, Matt Chapman wants to be a Giant, but the Giants are just ignoring him. That's just a totally made up narrative. I don't know who is saying that, but unless it's just a guess by whoever wrote that to me. But that's not what's happening at all. We have no idea what's happening behind the scenes. There's always the possibility that they even have deals with players or tentative deals with players, and they're waiting until they can put guys on the 60-day IL in order to clear spots on the roster for those players. And that deadline is coming up pretty soon here, within a week or so, I think at the start of spring training. And so, and pitchers and catchers report next Wednesday. And so I'm not exactly sure what the date is. It may be that Wednesday, but that's a big deal. I think the 40-man is full. And so, look, I think that the Giants will make at least one more significant addition. And hey, they're in a position where they can make 2 or 3 significant additions, potentially, some probably via trade if it's that many. But at the same time, they're not done, in my opinion. If they're done, they didn't do enough. But if they're not done, then you have a chance to vault yourself into that same territory where you're right in the mix with all the other teams that aren't the Braves and the Dodgers in the National League. So anyway, coming up in just a minute, we are going to turn our attention to Keith Law's top 100 prospects. Now, we said we were going to get to this yesterday. We weren't able to fit it in, but we're going to get to it today. Who are the Giants on this list? This is a new top 100 list. We like to look at them all. And Keith Law coming up in just a minute. But before we get into it, today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. Me personally, back when I had a 2002 BMW M3, very much used when I bought it, I kind of added some classy style using eBay Motors, and everything fit perfectly and it was just a breeze and totally upgraded the car. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, as mine was at the time, and now it's no longer with us. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for, and with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP like I did and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Alrighty. As promised, we're going to get into this Keith Law top 100 prospects list in The Athletic. Now, no offense to Keith Law, but once again, I'm going to do the same caveat I did with PECOTA and say it's not my favorite top 100. I'm not saying it's not worth looking at all. I think Keith Law is obviously good at what he does, but there are other prospect analysts who I trust more. There was one famous Keith Law moment where he redid the draft that included Bryce Harper and Manny Machado and stuff, and he said that he would take Andrelton Simmons as the number one pick in that draft, and his reasoning was that he thinks or thought that Simmons's defense would allow him to have the longest remaining career and rack up the most WAR. It was just I just couldn't believe what I was reading. You're talking about you'd rather have Andrelton Simmons's career than Harper or Manny Machado. That's just insane to me. And there's a little bit of that I want to be different. So again, no offense. That's just my observation. But so there is a little bit of that where it's he doesn't conform to what everyone else is saying necessarily. And so you get some differences. And one of those differences, by the way, is Kyle Harrison. He's super high on, and he just keeps being super high on him. Even his 2023 ranking was 12th. And in 2024, Kyle Harrison comes in as the Giants' number one prospect at 11th overall, according to Keith Law, who says, quote, the top left-handed pitching prospect in baseball. That MLB.com believes the same thing, that Harrison is the best left-handed pitching prospect in baseball. Law continues, Harrison had a rough go in his AAA debut last year, walking 16.3% of hitters. I appreciate that Keith Law is using percentage and not walks per nine, which is, just the percentage. It's simply what percent of batters did you walk? It's so much more of a straightforward metric, whereas walks per nine can be misleading. He says, at least some of which was likely attributable to the automated ball strike system that's used in some AAA games and missing a month with a hamstring injury, but he showed much better in his 7 Major League starts, including throwing a lot more strikes than expected. Harrison comes with a low 3/4 arm slot that makes him very tough on left-handed hitters, working 92-97 with a hard running life along with a hard slurve that mostly breaks downward and a changeup that's potentially plus and has good separation from the fastball. It's not an easy delivery to repeat, so his command will probably always be a question, but the improved control in the majors was a great sign, and his sudden trouble with the long ball, 8 homers allowed in 34 2/3 Major League innings, 4 of them in a single start, seems fluky, with 3 coming from left-handed batters. So I 100% agree with that. Yes. So he continues, everyone wants to make pitchers who throw like Harrison into Chris Sale, but I think that's unfair to both guys. The White Sox gave Chris Sale a new grip that turned his slider into a 70 on the 20 to 80 scouting scale, while Harrison may end up relying much more on the fastball changeup and saving his breaker for left-on-left crime. Regardless of how he puts it together, he looks like a number 2 starter. Like now is what he's saying. He looks like a number 2 starter and has that ace upside if the command takes a leap or if he can tighten up the slurve. End quote. So I apologize for the long read there, but when you're talking about a guy who is considered by this prospect analyst to be the 11th best prospect in baseball, a guy who projects to be in the Giants opening day starting rotation and is very young. I believe he's 22. He may be 23 at this point. Let's see. Kyle Harrison. Let's find out for sure. I'm pretty sure he's definitely 22 or 23. He's 22 and a half. Kind of right in the middle. Turns 23 in August. So Giants have this guy in the major leagues. MLB and Keith Law agree that he's the top left-handed pitching prospect in the game. So, for all the criticism of this regime and whatnot, this is certainly one feather in their cap, is drafting Kyle Harrison, and they drafted him in the 3rd round or something like that. And so, and signed him to an overslot deal. He was committed to UCLA, blah, blah, blah. But, just a meteoric rise and a potential breakout candidate for sure for Harrison. But it gets a little gloomier after that because the next Giants player we have to go all the way to number 84. So that is disappointing when you're talking about a guy like Marco Luciano, who last year came in on Keith Law's very own rankings at number 21. So Keith Law was pretty high on Marco Luciano, and that's fallen quite a bit. And so the explanation, I'm going to probably not read this whole thing, but he says Luciano started the year on the IL while recovering from a stress fracture in his lower back and finally got rolling after some time in Double-A, then ended up in the big leagues and was mostly overmatched. He did hit the ball very hard in the majors, as he's done everywhere when healthy, and he's able to keep up with fastballs, but off-speed stuff was an issue even in Double-A and killed him at the next 2 stops. And he went from a 30% strikeout rate in Double-A to 35% in Triple-A to 37% in the big leagues, which is all an argument that he should have stayed in Double-A until he showed better non-fastball recognition. Keith Law says he's also not a shortstop, and I think moving him to left field might allow him to focus more on developing the bat while also perhaps keeping him healthy. He's still quite young, just 22 all season with barely 300 professional games on his resume, and he's got a strong swing that's geared for 25 to 30 homers. I never bought him as a shortstop or really even a second baseman, but I thought the bat would be more advanced than this. He can still be an above average regular if the Giants give him the time to develop his pitch recognition. And so that's kind of like a wet blanket on Marco Luciano, but at the same time, he does point out he's quite young, just 22 all season, and they kind of rushed him a little bit, and that they're, also the fact that he kept up with fastballs, that's a good sign. I mean, if you can't hit the fastball, you can't play in this league, but you also need to, the strikeout rate stuff. I think that the analysis that Law is providing here is kind of spot on. You don't like to see that kind of trend. It was in a small sample, although I'll also say that in the small sample that we saw Luciano in the majors, he looked pretty decent at shortstop, if not kind of good. And I just haven't seen enough of him to be, all these people outside the Giants organization say he's not a shortstop. All the more reason, again, I just discussed this yesterday, but I did a full episode on why the Giants should trade for Willy Adames. Right after the Brewers traded Corbin Burns to the Orioles, it made it clear that they're probably willing to listen on Willy Adames, who, like Corbin Burns, is a free agent after the 2024 season. And so trading for Willy Adames and then shifting. Look, I mean, Keith Law's suggestion that Luciano go to left isn't totally feasible because you have Conforto, you have Luis Matos, those guys kind of project into left right now, and you've got in center Jung Ho Lee, who we're going to talk about next, And in right, you've got Yastrzemski, you've got Slater. And so I don't really see the fit or like how he fits into the outfield right now. Whereas I have said, if you go get like a Willy Adames, you can let third base become more of a competition and merit-based with Casey Schmidt, Marco Luciano, J.D. Davis, all those guys kind of competing, particularly the young guys. Like, I'd like to see Schmidt and Luciano kind of compete and see, the defense of Schmidt, the potential of the bat with Luciano, and see who comes out on top, and just let them develop in that way. I'd just really like to see that. So I still believe what I said. Go trade for Willy Adames and, don't totally rely on Marco Luciano. So the last player, I believe there's only one more Giants player to appear on the list, and that is going to be Bryce Eldridge. And that's interesting. So he was also on MLB.com's list. He comes in at number 85 here, one spot below Marco Luciano. And this is his first year of eligibility to be on a list. He was just drafted in the latest draft. And so I'm going to read quickly the write-up. Eldridge was a two-way prospect in high school, 91, 95 off the mound, but without an average second pitch. So his future always seemed to be in the batter's box. He's 6'7" and can show you the huge power that you associate with those taller guys. But unlike most hitters his size, he has a very short swing, and there's reason to hope he'll be an outlier among his peers when it comes to contact rate. His technique is geared toward putting the ball in play rather than a dead pull approach to show off his power. So he goes the other way comfortably, hits the ball very hard when he does so. He was bothered by an ankle injury for the latter half of the spring and wasn't running that well even over the summer when the Giants moved him to right field from his high school position of first base, although I'd reserve judgment on his outfield defense until this season when we see him at full go. There's definitely risk here, as the history of hitters 6'7" and up is not great because of their size. Because their size typically means they swing and miss too often, the exceptions have done it, with huge power like Aaron Judge and the late Frank Howard. Eldridge's ceiling is one where the power comes, but he also maintains a higher contact rate than the lowercase g Giants because of the shape of his swing. So, I don't know. This is an exciting guy, and the fact that he's appearing on top 100 lists, including Law just writing him off as a pitcher, whereas the Giants are going to let him do both, is, I don't know, Eldridge is just an exciting guy to watch with that 6'7" frame and the power, but also the ability to potentially hit for average with that kind of height and size and power potential. So he's someone to watch for sure going into 2024. Anyway, coming up in just a minute, we're going to get into Jung Ho Lee. You know why? Because there's 51 days until spring training. Until the opener, not spring. There's like a week until spring training, 51 days until opening day, and that's Jung Ho Lee's number. So we're going to use that opportunity to discuss more about Jung Ho Lee and the projections and what is so interesting about them. And I find it fascinating. We'll get into it in just a minute. And before we do, today's episode, yes, my friends, is brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And if you live around here, you're probably happier than most because the 49ers, yes, indeed, are in the Super Bowl, taking on the Kansas City Chiefs. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, getting your favorite snacks, and placing some super bets, and also being super nervous when your team is in the big game. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon, and new customers, when you join today, you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins, and you can bet on just about anything with Super Bowl 58 or like who will win the game. I mean, you can bet on who will win the game, or things like which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, etc. Right now, the odds are the Niners are favorites at -130 on the money line. The spread, they're favorites, of course, at -2.5 points, and the over-under 47.5 points. So again, FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, as promised, we are going to get into Jung Ho Lee just a little bit. Why not? 51 days until opening day, and number 51 is Jung Ho Lee. And so what I find so interesting is that the projection systems, like if you look on FanGraphs and you just like type in Jung Ho Lee, type in anybody's name, it's kind of great. That's what I love about FanGraphs. Like one of the many things is that you're literally looking at, this is how many projection systems they have like on the player page. They've got Zips, the Bat X, the Bat, ATC, and Steamer. And then you've got these other things. There's Zips DC, and there's FanGraphs depth charts. And so those two can be kind of ignored. I guess the FanGraphs depth charts shouldn't be ignored, because what that is just a combination of Zips and Steamer. And then playing time adjustments. And the Zips DC is Zips depth charts. So it's the same kind of rate stats, but with the FanGraphs projected playing time. And so it's important to know what those are. And the Bat X is one of the better projection systems out there. ATC is like an average of not a million, I don't know how many, but a lot of different projection systems. And it turns out to be really good because of that. Like when you just average all the projection systems, it turns out to be one of the best, if not the best. So anyway, I love that we get so many different projections, and it allows us to see kind of the variance, like the range of predicted outcomes for players, especially players who are new to the league like Jung Ho Lee. Anyway, I do want to tell you that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now you can also find it on Amazon Fire TV. Yes, that's right. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today on Amazon Fire TV. All right, getting into Jung Ho Lee. For those of you who have missed me discussing the projections for Lee, basically they're all good. They're not like MVP level good, but they're like borderline all-star good, or at least like above average good. And what's so interesting to me is that when we look at the projections, like there's not a wide range of projected outcomes. I was about to say outcomes, but the thing is, obviously we don't know what's actually going to happen, but these are like different projection systems, and they're all coming out with basically the same numbers. So that's not like groupthink or anything. That's just agreement, consensus among the systems on how this guy translates to the major leagues. And so I've seen a lot of talk about he's AA, blah, blah, blah. Like the KBO is like AA. Well, if the KBO is like AA, this guy is due for a promotion to the majors based on the numbers he was putting up in AA. Like he was the best player there in the whole league. And so, good major league players also play in AA at some point in their careers. And so if that's where the KBO really is, I mean, it's more about projections, and teams rely on projections. They have their own projections. I'm sure they kind of look at external projections, but they have their own, and they're probably more accurate than these even. And for Lee, let me just rattle off some numbers. They've got him, the range for batting average, the low end of the spectrum is 285, and that comes from the Bat. The Bat X at 285, which would be one of the best in the game. Like, nobody hits 300. I mean, there's like 2-3 players who hit over 300 in a year, something like 5 maybe, but it's an impossible standard. League average is like 242 or something. So 285 is the low end of the range for Lee, with 291 being the high end from Steamer. So a range of just 6 points there, from 285 to 291. They're all in agreement that he's somewhere in that range. And then on base percentage, the range goes from 344, which is the Bat and the Bat X, and the high end is 354, and that is Steamer. So 344 to 354. Again, a narrow kind of band of expected or projected outcomes. And then for slugging, the low end coming from Zips at 416, and the high end actually coming from the Bat X, which was the low one on batting average and on base. So that's a differential of 17 points, but still 416, 433. So in terms of weighted runs created plus, which just kind of puts it all together, and 100 is league average. The low number is Zips at 110. The high number is Steamer at 116. And so the middle is 113. No surprise, ATC, which is, again, the average of all the projection systems, is at 113. And so, 10 to 16% above average is kind of what these projection systems see for Lee, with positive contributions on defense. And so counting the depth charts versions of the projections, which take into account projected playing time, the low end is 2.6 wins above replacement, which is above average already, and that's the low end. And the high number is Steamer at 3.5. And so, I would take anywhere in that range, preferably, the higher end. But if he's somewhere in the middle, and again, ATC has him kind of right in the middle at 2.9. I guess the middle is 3.1, which is where the Bat is on him, the Bat and the Bat X. So a 3-win player is nice, but that's included, in that PECOTA projection system is their accounting. I don't know. PECOTA does their own projections. So anyway, just thought some Jung Ho Lee talk was appropriate with 51 days to go until opening day. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers, we're finally going to get back to a mailbag tomorrow. So look out on Twitter tonight for the prompt, and we will get to your questions tomorrow, as we will be a week away from spring training. Very exciting. Anyway, once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, and only if you like it, just kidding, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out so much, as long as it's positive. So thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again tomorrow answering your questions. Thanks again for listening. Today, you are now Locked On Giants.